Have you ever wondered if the person you show the world isn't the real you? What if the life you're living right now is carefully designed to keep you distracted from something deeper? Not from failure, not from other people, but from yourself. Because the truth is, most people aren't afraid of losing. They're afraid of facing what's inside them when everything gets quiet. The thoughts they keep pushing away, the emotions they never fully felt, the questions they've spent years avoiding. And the strangest part is, running from yourself doesn't look like running. It looks like staying busy, staying entertained, staying distracted, looking normal, looking successful, looking fine. But deep down, something always feels unsettled, like there's a part of you trying to get your attention, and every time it speaks, you drown it out with work, with noise, with people, with endless stimulation, because facing yourself is uncomfortable. It forces you to ask dangerous questions. Am I actually happy? Do I even know who I am without my routines? If I stopped distracting myself, what would I feel? And maybe the scariest question of all, what if I've been avoiding myself for years without realizing it? Because the mind is clever. It protects you, sometimes by helping you heal and sometimes by helping you hide. And when hiding becomes a habit, it starts to feel like living. But there are signs, small patterns, invisible habits. And once you notice them, you start seeing yourself differently. Sign 1, you cannot sit in silence. This is the biggest one, and probably the most common because silence sounds peaceful until you're alone with it. Think about it. The moment things get quiet, what do? Reach for your phone, play music, turn on a video, call someone, anything to fill the space. Why? Because silence removes the distraction, and when distraction disappears, your mind starts speaking. That's when the real things come up. The hurt you never processed, the fear you never named, the loneliness you never admitted. Silence doesn't create these feelings, it reveals them. That's why some people say they hate being bored, but boredom is often just emotional discomfort with nowhere to hide. Your nervous system gets addicted to stimulation because stimulation keeps you away from yourself. And the scary thing is, if silence feels unbearable, you have to ask yourself why. What is waiting for you there? What truth keeps knocking when everything else goes quiet? Sign 2. You stay busy all the time, not productive. Busy, there's a difference. Productivity builds something. Busyness often protects something. Look closely at your life. Do you always need something to do? Always another task, another goal, another thing to fix, another thing to chase. It looks ambitious, and sometimes it is, but sometimes it's escape. Because being busy gives you something powerful, an excuse to never stop. And stopping is dangerous because stillness creates awareness, and awareness creates uncomfortable questions. What if I'm not fulfilled? What if this isn't the life I actually want? What if everything I'm chasing is just keeping me distracted? That's why some people work themselves into exhaustion, not because they love the work, because work keeps the deeper questions away. And the world rewards busyness. That's what makes it dangerous. People praise the very thing that might be helping you run. Sign 3, you reach for distraction the moment you feel discomfort. Pay attention to this. Something stressful happens, and instantly you scroll. Something painful hits, and instantly you open an app. Something awkward happens, and instantly you escape into your screen. That reaction says something. Your brain has learned a pattern. Discomfort means distraction. Instead of processing the emotion, you interrupt it. And when you interrupt emotion enough times, it never gets resolved. It just gets stored. And stored emotion doesn't disappear. It waits. It builds. It shapes your behavior in ways you don't even notice. That's why so many people feel mentally heavy for no clear reason. Because they're carrying emotions they never allowed themselves to finish feeling. Distraction feels harmless. But when it becomes your first response to discomfort, it becomes emotional avoidance. And emotional avoidance always collects interest. The longer you avoid it, the heavier it becomes. Sign 4. What if the thing you call overthinking is actually avoidance? This is where it gets dangerous because overthinking feels productive. It feels like you're solving something, understanding something, preparing for something. But often, You're just circling. Think about it. How many times have you replayed conversations in your head, imagined scenarios that never happened, obsessed over tiny details? It feels like analysis, but sometimes it's protection. Because if your mind keeps you focused on small things, you never have to face the big thing, the real fear, the real wound, the real truth. Maybe you overanalyze relationships because admitting someone hurt you would break the illusion. Maybe you obsess over the future because your present feels empty. Maybe your overthinking isn't confusion. Maybe it's defense. And here's the trap. Overthinking tricks you into believing you're confronting the problem when you're actually avoiding it. That's why it never brings peace, because peace comes from truth. And overthinking keeps truth at a distance. It keeps you busy inside your own mind. And that's one of the most effective ways to run from yourself, because you can spend years thinking without ever truly facing. And if these signs feel familiar, that's not a bad thing. It means something inside you is waking up, because awareness is uncomfortable, but necessary. And what comes next goes even deeper, because the next signs aren't about what you do. They're about who you become. When running from yourself becomes a way of life. Because after a while, running from yourself stops looking like a habit. It starts looking like your personality. And that's where it gets dangerous, because the longer you avoid what's inside you, the more your defense mechanisms start becoming your identity. And you stop asking, why am I like this? You just start saying, this is just who I am. But sometimes, who you think you are is just how you learn to survive. And the next signs reveal that. Sign 5. You joke when things get serious. Someone asks how you're doing, and instead of answering honestly, you make a joke. You laugh. You deflect. You shift the energy, and most people don't notice it, because humor is socially rewarded. It makes people comfortable. It keeps things light. But sometimes humor isn't expression. It's protection, because if people are laughing, they're not looking deeper. And maybe that feels safer. For many people, humor becomes armor, a way to stay seen without being exposed, a way to stay connected without being vulnerable. And vulnerability is terrifying when honesty once felt unsafe. So you learn to perform instead of reveal, to entertain instead of express, and over time, you forget how to speak without hiding behind a smile. That's the tragedy of emotional defense. When it works long enough, it starts feeling like your real self. Sign 6. You avoid being alone, always making plans, always needing company, always keeping some kind of noise around you. And at first, it looks healthy, social, connected. But ask yourself something: when you're alone, how do you feel? Peaceful or restless? Because solitude magnifies what's unresolved. It removes external noise and raises internal noise. Memories get louder, feelings get clearer, questions become harder to avoid. That's why some people stay around the wrong people, not because they belong there, but because loneliness feels heavier. And being alone means meeting yourself without interruption. No distractions, no validation, no escape, just you. And for someone who's been running, that can feel unbearable, because solitude doesn't just show you who you are, it shows you who you've been avoiding. Sign 7, you feel emotionally numb, not broken, not dramatic, just distant, like life is happening, but you're not fully inside it. Things that used to excite you don't hit the same. Moments that should feel meaningful feel flat. And you tell yourself, maybe this is normal, maybe this is adulthood, maybe this is maturity, but sometimes it's emotional shutdown. Because the mind has a survival mechanism. If pain becomes too overwhelming, it lowers the volume. But here's the problem: it doesn't lower the volume only on pain. It lowers everything: joy, connection, love, wonder. That's why numbness is deceptive. It feels calm, but it isn't peace. Peace feels alive. Numbness feels absent. And the longer you stay numb, the easier it becomes to mistake disconnection for stability. But deep down, a numb life still feels empty. Because humans weren't built just to function. They were built to feel. Sign 8. You feel exhausted, or even when you're doing nothing. This one confuses a lot of people because they think exhaustion only comes from effort, but inner resistance is effort too. Carrying thoughts you never speak, feelings you never process, Pain you never face. That takes energy. A lot of it. Pretending you're okay takes energy. Suppressing anger takes energy. Avoiding grief takes energy. Holding in fear takes energy. And over time, that invisible weight becomes your normal. So you wake up tired. You move through the day tired. You sleep and still wake up tired. Not because your body is broken, but because your mind has been fighting itself for years. An internal war is exhausting. That's what most people never realize. The thing draining them isn't always life. Sometimes it's resistance, resistance to truth, resistance to emotion, resistance to themselves. And when you connect all these signs together, the pattern becomes clear. Silence feels uncomfortable. Busyness feels necessary. Distraction feels automatic. Overthinking feels endless. Humor becomes armor. Solitude feels heavy. Emotion feels distant. Exhaustion feels permanent. Different signs, same root. Avoidance. Not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because at some point, avoiding was easier than facing. And maybe it protected you once. Maybe running helped you survive something. Maybe hiding was necessary. But survival and living are not the same thing. What protects you in one season can imprison you in another. And there comes a point where the cost becomes too high. Because when you spend years running from yourself, you lose access to yourself, your real feelings, your real needs, your real truth. And that's why so many people wake up one day feeling lost. Not because they disappeared, because they abandoned themselves slowly, quietly, over time. But here's the good news. If you can recognize these signs, you're already changing. Awareness is the first return, the first step back to yourself, because you cannot heal what you refuse to see. And maybe the goal was never to become someone new. Maybe the goal was to stop running long enough to remember who you were before the fear, before the defense, before the escape. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not fixing yourself, finding yourself, sitting with the silence, facing the discomfort, listening to what your mind has been trying to tell you all along. Because the truth is, the thing you've been running from might not be your enemy. It might be the part of you that's been waiting to be heard. And the moment you stop running, you may realize something powerful. You were never trying to escape yourself. You were trying to escape your pain. And pain, when faced honestly, doesn't destroy you. It teaches you. And sometimes the most important journey in your life is not chasing something outside of you. It's returning to yourself. Please like and subscribe.